I met him at a small family gathering where laughter and casual conversations filled the air. He was introduced to me through mutual acquaintances, someone I had heard of but never spoken to before. We exchanged polite greetings, and as the conversation flowed among the group, I found myself sitting across from him. His presence was calm, not the loud or overconfident type, yet he spoke with a clarity that drew attention without effort. At one point, in the middle of a light-hearted exchange, I asked with a teasing tone, "You're not married yet?" expecting the usual awkward chuckle or deflection people give when asked such things. Instead, he looked at me directly, a small smile tugging at his lips, and said, "Give me a chance, and maybe I won't be single anymore." It wasn't the kind of response I was prepared for. I laughed lightly to mask the small flutter of surprise, assuming it was a joke. Yet there was something in his voice, an ease, a confidence, and perhaps a shade of sincerity, that lingered in my thoughts even as the topic shifted. Around us, the clink of teacups and the faint hum of conversation created a comforting background, but I found myself unusually focused on this brief, peculiar exchange. We continued talking about ordinary topics, work routines, family responsibilities, even the unpredictability of the weather, but there was an underlying attentiveness in the way he spoke. He remembered tiny details from earlier parts of the conversation, responded with thoughtful remarks rather than empty agreement, and seemed genuinely curious about my opinions. That rare quality of listening made me feel oddly seen, even in such a casual setting. I noticed how his humor wasn't forced, how he didn't try to impress with exaggerated stories or over-polished compliments. Instead, his words carried a certain authenticity that felt disarming. The more we spoke, the more I realized I was leaning into the conversation without meaning to. He asked questions that made me think not just about the surface of things but about how I viewed certain aspects of life. I didn't answer all of them fully, partly because some were too personal for a first meeting, and partly because I didn't want to reveal how engaged I had already become. When it was time to leave, I told myself it had been nothing more than a pleasant conversation, the kind you forget after a few days. But as I stepped out into the cool evening air, the words, "Give me a chance," echoed unexpectedly in my mind. I replayed the exact tone, the small smile, the quiet confidence behind them. I didn't know whether he had meant them as a light-hearted flirtation or a subtle promise, but I realized I was curious enough to want to find out. The next day, a message from him appeared on my phone. It wasn't overly personal or romantic, just a short note referencing something we had talked about, almost as if picking up where the conversation had left off. I replied without overthinking, and that small exchange opened the door to more frequent communication. Our talks unfolded slowly, never rushed, like two people testing the waters without forcing the current. He would send a link to an article related to a topic we discussed, or a casual comment about something in the news, and I found myself looking forward to those moments more than I expected. We began meeting occasionally, always under natural circumstances, coffee with friends, errands that happened to cross paths, or mutual invitations to small gatherings. In those moments, I noticed the consistency in his demeanor. He wasn't trying to overwhelm me with grand gestures or declarations. Instead, his reliability stood out. He was present when he said he would be, attentive in conversation, and never made me feel as though I had to compete for his attention. Through these interactions, I started to see the layers beneath his calm nature. He spoke about his work with quiet determination, not boasting, but with a sense of responsibility that was admirable. He asked about my goals without judgment, and when I hesitated to share certain details, he didn't press. That respect for boundaries made me more comfortable, and over time, I found myself opening up in ways I usually didn't with someone I had known for such a short period. Small gestures left a stronger impact than I wanted to admit. Once, I mentioned in passing that I was struggling to finish a project due to a minor technical issue. Without making it a grand act, he found a solution and sent it over the next day, saying simply, "Thought this might help." There was no expectation of thanks or recognition, and that made the gesture feel even more genuine. I still reminded myself to be cautious. Past experiences had taught me not to mistake kindness for deeper intentions, and I didn't want to misread signals. Yet, with him, there was a sense of steadiness that didn't feel like the fleeting warmth people sometimes offer before fading away. He didn't disappear for days only to return with excuses, nor did he create unnecessary drama to test my reactions. Everything about the way he communicated carried a natural ease, as though he was building trust one interaction at a time without even saying it aloud. The line he had spoken that first day, "Give me a chance," occasionally surfaced in my thoughts. It was no longer just a curious remark I replayed in my mind. It was becoming a quiet possibility. I didn't know yet if he meant it in the way my heart was beginning to interpret, but I could feel the question forming inside me. What if I did? It was during an ordinary week when a small seed of doubt was planted. A mutual acquaintance, in the middle of casual conversation, mentioned that he might not be ready for something serious. The words weren't framed as gossip, just an offhand remark, yet they settled heavily in my mind. I didn't ask for clarification, but they lingered enough to shift the way I interacted with him. Without fully realizing it, I began to keep my responses shorter, my tone more guarded, and my availability more limited. He noticed. It was subtle at first, questions like, "Is everything okay?" or pauses after my replies, as if weighing whether to push further. I brushed it off, saying I was just busy, but there was no hiding the change for long. One evening he addressed it directly. There was no irritation in his voice, only concern, and a quiet determination to understand. "If something's bothering you," he said, "I'd rather you tell me than drift away without a reason." His straightforwardness caught me off guard. I hesitated, unsure if I should admit what I had heard, but his steady gaze made evasion feel pointless. I told him exactly what had been said, careful to leave out the name of the person who'd mentioned it. I expected defensiveness or a quick dismissal. Instead, he took a moment, then spoke with a calmness that felt deliberate. He explained that in the past, he hadn't been ready to commit, not because he didn't value relationships, but because personal circumstances had demanded his focus. He spoke about career instability, family obligations, and moments when he knew it wouldn't be fair to ask someone to wait for him. But he said that wasn't where he was anymore. His life had reached a point of balance, and when he met me, he realized he wanted something steady and real. The honesty in his words was matched by the steadiness in his actions. He didn't try to overcompensate or make exaggerated promises. Instead, he reminded me of the consistency I had already seen. His reliability, his attentiveness, his quiet support. It made the doubts I had been entertaining feel less like truths and more like shadows cast by someone else's perception. In that moment, I recognized that trust isn't built in grand declarations but in the accumulation of small, unshaken moments. The way he had handled my hesitation, without pressure, without anger, was itself an answer. Still, I knew that acknowledging his sincerity was one thing, deciding to truly believe in it was another. That choice would have to come from me, not from reassurance alone. As the conversation drew to a close, I felt the weight of the earlier doubt begin to lift. It wasn't gone entirely, but it no longer stood between us in the same way. For the first time since I had heard those words from the acquaintance, I began to think that maybe, just maybe, giving him that chance was worth consid. Days passed with a quiet clarity settling in my mind. I had replayed our interactions from the very beginning, searching for signs of inconsistency or empty charm, and found none. Every moment, from his first message to the way he handled my doubts, had carried the same steady rhythm. There was no rush in his approach, no attempt to corner me into a decision, only the unspoken assurance that he would remain the same whether I said yes or no. That alone made the decision easier. I asked him to meet me for coffee, keeping the invitation casual. When he arrived, I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him I had been thinking about that first day, about his words, "Give me a chance," and how they had shifted from a playful comment to something that had slowly rooted itself in my thoughts. I told him that I was ready to see where this could go. His reaction wasn't loud or dramatic. There was a stillness in the way he looked at me, followed by a smile that carried both relief and certainty. We didn't jump into big plans or make sudden promises. Instead, we spoke about taking things one step at a time, meeting each other's families, and allowing the relationship to grow naturally. He admitted that he had wanted to say more in the past weeks, but he had been waiting for me to reach this point on my own. That patience now seemed like one of his strongest qualities, the quiet kind of care that doesn't demand but instead waits for the right moment. The conversation moved easily into the familiar comfort we had built, filled with small jokes and shared memories. There was no need to define every detail of the future right there and then. It was enough to know that we were moving in the same direction, with the same intention. In the back of my mind, I understood that challenges might still come, but there was a confidence in knowing that the foundation we had built was real. When it came time to leave, there was a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that the decision I had been hesitant to make was never really about him. It was about whether I could allow myself to trust again. That day I had chosen to. His words from the start had been simple, almost casual, yet they had carried the weight of possibility. Now, they felt like the opening line of a new chapter neither of us had tried to rush. As I walked away, I thought about how unexpected moments can quietly change the course of our lives. One sentence, spoken with both ease and sincerity, had led to this point. And though I didn't know every turn the path ahead would take, I knew I was stepping into it with someone who had already shown me the kind of consistency I could believe in. It had started with a chance, and I had finally decided to give it.